Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 250. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, talking about Ukraine, Julian Assange, and Somalia. So, a lot of important news on today's show. Be sure to share the show, and it's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. And today is the first day of the Libertarian Institute Spring 2022 fundraiser. So, if you could go over and help out the Institute, continue to support what I'm doing, not only the show, but the writing that myself and Will Porter have been doing at the Libertarian Institute. I was looking today, I think we've published about 50 articles in the month that we've been doing this, working as a team on the news page there. So that's an awful lot of content, and if you would like to support what we're doing, and there's also some great kit bags that you'll get, including these pretty cool beds that say whatever it is, we're against it, which is a great way to summarize what we're talking about at the Libertarian Institute. So head on over, check that out, and support what we're doing if you can. That will help the show. Just want to remind people that other places you could find and subscribe to the show. You can find the show on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee, on the blog at antiwar.com. Anywhere you could listen to podcasts, including on the Libertarian Institute All podcast feed. And so you could listen to the Scott Horton Show, Free Man Beyond the Wall, Liberty Weekly, and Year Zero as well, if you subscribe to that. And then the sponsor of the show is Paloma Verde, home to a wide selection of high quality CBD products. PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code PEACE. That saves you 20% off, and it gets the show a kickback. All right, let's get into the show. And the first thing I want to do is I actually have to correct myself in a mistake I made in the past on the show. In some ways, it's not like hugely important, but it does impact some of the current events going on. So I just want to make sure that I get this straightened out, because I conflated the Patriot air defense missile interceptor system with the Aegis Ashore missile defense system. And that is kind of not important, because both of those systems are deployed in Romania and Poland. However, now that we're talking about moving the Patriot missile systems to other Eastern European countries, it doesn't present like, as we're talking about moving these into now Slovakia, it won't give them the kind of missile system that could also launch a Tomahawk missile. So when I talked about in the past on the show, I said that it was the same system, that was the same missile launchers that were deployed on those ships. But the ones on the ships are the Aegis, and then you have the Aegis Ashore, which again is only in Romania and Poland, and I haven't heard any discussion about moving any of those systems into Slovakia or Turkey, where they have talked about moving the Patriot missile systems. I did a bunch of research on this morning. The Aegis used the Mk-41 launchers made by Lockheed Martin that can fit the nuclear-armed Tomahawk missiles, anti-ship missiles, and then a couple variations of interceptors. Now, the Army and Navy present these systems as complementary, because the Aegis system targets things, I believe, closer to their source and tries to hit it when it's still in the missile phase. The burners on the missiles are still going, and it isn't as much designed to hit things that are then high altitude, or in their ballistic missile phase, where it's just the warhead, or the warhead phase is maybe what they call it. And the Patriot missile systems are more designed to do that. Now, there are plenty of shortcomings with both systems, and I don't want to present them as just great every time they hit their target or anything, or that they really do act in a complementary way where it would defend these countries from a Russian missile attack, because how effective they are against cruise or hypersonic missiles, which we've seen Russia use in Ukraine, is very questionable. So yeah, that's an important point to make. Now, all these systems, I do think Russia has identified as a threat, although the Aegis would be the one that violates the INF treaty that was scrapped under the Trump administration, that because Russia identified those Mk-41 missile launchers as the problem. And so this wouldn't be, again, moving the Patriot missile systems, I don't think would be an actual violation of the INF treaty. Now, they do, I think, still violate the anti-ballistic missile treaty, and that's an issue. Although both of these agreements are now in the waste bin of history, killed by John Bolton. But at the same time, if you want to return to a more stable power balance in Europe, you would need to return to agreements similar to the anti-ballistic missile treaty, to the INF treaty. And the more the U.S. is proliferating weapon systems that violate those agreements, the more problematic they are. But again, very key here is the fact that the Aegis can launch the Tomahawk missiles with the nuclear tip, and that is, what I think is seen as the biggest threat to Russia. Now, the more missile defense systems that the U.S. deploys into Eastern Europe, you do have to worry, I think, if you're, Russia or the rest of the human population, that if the U.S. feels these systems are more effective than they actually are, and that they could combat or take down, Russian missile launches against Eastern European partners, maybe they think, well, it would be worth it to try to enforce a no-fly zone over Russia because we have the ability to essentially force a no-fly zone over all of Eastern Europe, and we don't think Russia's actually going to roll any tanks into Slovakia or Poland or anything like that. So, maybe they make an insane calculation based on these systems working better than they actually do. In that way, they are a threat. And as we've talked about the war in Yemen, while they're billed as defensive, if you either in reality or in your own fiction believe that you could create an effective shield to defend you against your offensive attacks, it's going to make you much more likely to gauge in offensive warfare. And so all these systems are part of the war machine, and it's just US war machine propaganda that bills them as defensive. So those are most of the points I think I want to make on this, but really to start off here by correcting myself, and because I did get that wrong, and again conflated the Aegis Ashore and the Patriot missile system, although both of those are deployed to both Poland and Romania. So all that plus kind of how my talking points were before, the things I was saying about how these were problematic for Russia, the security, it is the Aegis Ashore systems that I think Russia is most concerned about. I'm not sure exactly if they've made any actual U.S. demands to remove Patriot missile batteries, or if they have any specific complaints against those. Now, another thing I want to point out here, and while again, I this isn't the point I was initially making when I was talking about the problems with the Patriot missile systems. However, I did find a report from CSIS, and it was funded by Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. And the report from 2018 says that the U.S. should essentially give up the posture that these weapons are defensive, and basically start to equip their missile defense batteries with you put 2 rounds you would put 4 missiles in there that are interceptors that are good at hitting things at close to when they take off, and then you put in the Patriot interceptors that are good for a little bit longer range, or hitting things higher in orbit, things like that. And then you can also put in offensive capabilities into the other slots. And so you think you got these 4 boxes right in a square, and so 2 are interceptors and 2 are offensive capabilities. And they specifically point out that the current dimensions of and the way that the Patriot missile systems are deployed, they could easily fit 2 boxes of the Mk-41 missile launchers on them, which are the ones used in the Aegis Ashore, and to launch Tomahawk missiles. So that threat definitely exists, with these systems deployed. Even if the current abilities aren't there, the U.S. is talking about, and the U.S. military industrial complex is talking about giving the Patriot missiles the same capabilities that the Aegis Ashore have that made them such a tactical and nuclear threat towards Russia. Now, interesting too, the U.S. is currently working on, as a project, getting its missiles to fit in other missile systems. So they recently tested the Patriot missile. I think it's the PAC 3 is the newest one in the missile launcher for the THAAD system. And then they also tested a combination of the Tomahawk missile and the SM-6, the Standard Missile-6, which is an anti-ship missile, looking to give the Tomahawk more capabilities and a little bit of a different build. And so, these things are going on that could potentially one day, make the Patriot missile systems a larger threat than they currently are. But yeah, so that's where I wanted to start. And again, just making sure everybody in my audience gets that right. I don't want to be the reason that people are confusing the Patriots with the Aegis Ashore. All right, so now let's talk about what's happening with Slovakia, where first reported on this last week with Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute. Slovakia floats a dangerous scheme to arm Ukraine, revamp its own air defenses. NATO member Slovakia has offered to transfer an air defense system to Ukraine so long as the U.S. backfills its arsenal with new interceptors. The proposal is similar to one recently made by Polish officials, which would have provided Kiev with advanced fighter jets in exchange for American planes. Slovak Defense Minister Jaroslav Nad floated the idea during a joint presser with his counterpart on Thursday, saying his country is prepared to hand Ukraine its single Soviet-era S-300 defense system immediately, provided it gets proper replacement. As whether the United States would back the plan to provide Slovakia with any U.S.-made weapons, Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin declined to comment, saying, "I don't have any announcements for you this afternoon." These are things that we'll continue to work with our allies on, and certainly this is not just a U.S. issue, it's a NATO issue. Though Slovakia inherited its S-300 battery following the breakup of Czechoslovakia in 1993, the system is now produced by Russian defense contractor MZIK. Should Washington take up the suggestion, the Raytheon-made Patriot interceptor would likely be the candidate to replace Slovakia's aging S-300. Our current Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, formerly sat on Raytheon's board of directors. And so, that's definitely a conflict of interest. The plan appears to be gaining momentum along some European allies, with Germany offering to redeploy its own Patriot missiles to Slovakia earlier on Wednesday. An unnamed U.S. defense official also told reporters earlier this week that they are currently in active discussions about how to backfill foreign arsenals, including with Bulgaria, Slovakia, but refuse to get into specifics. There are other NATO countries other than Slovakia and Bulgaria who do have S-300s. And then I also think there are some other countries around the world that the U.S. that may not be at NATO allies, but the U.S. may try to pressure to get their S-300 missiles, to arm up Ukraine. There are other nations besides, the State Department, meanwhile, is now reportedly working to identify which countries currently have Soviet-made S-300 air defense systems and examining how they could be transferred to Ukraine. However, President Joe Biden grounded a similar proposal to transfer Polish MiG-29s to Ukraine and replace them with American fighter jets last week, while Secretary of State Antony Blinken initially said the plan got the green light. The administration quickly reversed course, saying the move would yield little tactical benefits and carried a high risk of escalation. It remains to be seen how Moscow will respond to the move and what the other consequences of this could be. Kiev is also seeking other air interceptors, things to shoot down planes, including the Soviet era SA-7 Grail system, which is shoulder fired, and the SAA Gecko, which is like a tank, that like a mobile surface to air missile platform. So yeah, I think that's most of the announcements, or most of what we have from that article. Now, I do want to add in that one of the reasons that the U.S. isn't sending the Patriot missile systems to Ukraine, despite the fact that they can hold the Tomahawk missiles, is that they take a long time to train on, and they're very difficult to use. Also, I'm not sure how tactically advantageous they would be. They only have a 120-degree vision on their radar systems, and if you look at Russia and then Belarus, that certainly, if you're especially in eastern Ukraine, is going to be more than 120 degrees, or would require maybe multiple of these systems to be deployed. And so those shortcomings could be a problem, but because of how long it takes to train, essentially only the US or NATO allied states could deploy the Patriot missile systems in Ukraine. That's about 90 troops that you're putting on the ground, and of course a major provocation that could lead to war. Now, me and Will had another article on the system, updating them this week, just yesterday actually, or I think we'll actually publish this morning. NATO members deployed Patriot missiles to Slovakia. This again from myself and Will Porter. NATO states Germany and the Netherlands have moved Patriot missile defense systems into Slovakia, the country's defense minister said, though they insisted they would not replace its S-300s, despite a recent proposal to transfer the Soviet-era platforms to Ukraine in exchange for the U.S.-made substitute. I can gladly confirm that the first units in exchange for the deployment of Patriot anti-air defense systems will gradually coming to the territory of the Slovak Republic. The process will continue over the next few days, the defense minister said. However, the defense minister stated that the Patriot missile batteries would not replace Slovakia's older Russian-made S-300 air defense platform, but his country would nonetheless continue to look for another system due to the S-300's age and inadequate capabilities. And so this is interesting because they're moving the Patriots now to Slovakia just a week after they announced that they were looking to move them to Slovakia so they could give Ukraine the S-300s, but now Slovakia is saying, well, we're taking the Patriots, but we're not going to transfer the S-300s. So I don't know. My guess is that this is a ploy, that they do plan to transfer these S-300s. Maybe Slovakia will technically transfer them to a third country first, and they'll try to do this a little bit more covertly, rather than making the announcement with the defense minister. But obviously, this could provoke a major reaction from Russia and could be a real issue. And then, my second question is, what would the tactical benefit be? Let's say you are able somehow to covertly ship these things into Ukraine, then what? You deploy them, and if you're lucky, you get a launch one salvo of them, but then Russia's going to identify where this system is, and they're going to take it out, would be my guess. I don't think that the S-300 will be capable of defending itself against the Russian hypersonic cruise missiles, and so I can't imagine that these things will make more than a very temporary help to Ukraine. And if that, kind of like the same situation we talked about with the MiG 29s when you're transferring them to Ukraine. So that's that's why I think I have on that. I guess I don't see this as being a huge issue because, again, I don't think they're going to be that effective or anything. But, if the NATO countries do try to move them into Ukraine and Russia finds out, it could come as a situation where Russia is attacking these systems just as they're entering Ukraine, or hopefully not before, but if they're transferring weapons from a NATO member state, and Slovakia and Romania and Poland all border Ukraine, well, then this is a real possibility of, if Russia identifies Slovakia as a belligerent, which, shipping weapons to a country at war does make you, this could get nasty and escalate very fast. It's a very dangerous situation, but Russia would, have to be involved in the escalation here as well if they're doing this. Now, the other country they're looking at sending Patriot missiles to, and this is from myself and Will Porter at antiwar.com, U.S. plots to upset Russia-Turkey relations as Ankara plays a key role in Ukraine peace talks. And then we say, with the plan in motion to arm Ukraine with Slovakia's S-300 air defense system, U.S. officials are pushing fellow NATO member Turkey to send its Russian-made S-400. The proposal is the U.S. is prepared to send the Patriot missiles defense system to replace it, the possibility of allowing Ankara to purchase the F-35. The idea was reportedly pitched by Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman when she visited Turkey earlier this month. The State Department and the Turkish embassy have not commented on the proposal. The Biden administration sees several benefits in the plan. It would provide Ukraine with more advanced air defense. The S-400 is newer and upgraded from the S-300, while it would also integrate Turkey with other NATO states that use Patriot systems. Moreover, Washington believes it would upset the relationship between Ankara and Moscow. Turkey is currently playing a leading role in negotiations to end the conflict in Ukraine, hosting the highest level talks so far. Turkey's foreign minister reported Sunday that several points of agreement have been made between Kiev and Moscow. Should it agree to arm the shipment to Ukraine, however, Turkey may lose its perceived neutrality in the talks and create a major blow to diplomacy. Turkey bought the S-400 from Russia in 2019 over vocal objections from the U.S., which at one point even sanctioned Turkish officials over the purchase. Washington also responded by booting Turkey from the S-35 program after years of joint work on developing the fighter. Ankara has also demanded reimbursement for the $1.4 billion it sunk into this project so far with no avail. So, Turkey was actually making components, I think landing gear and helmets for the F-35. And so even after the Turkey bought the S-400 and the U.S. said that Turkey wouldn't receive any of these parts, the planes, the F-35 finished products, the U.S. continues to import the parts from Turkey because they haven't set up manufacturers in the U.S. to make them. So it's been this whole mess that's cost the U.S. taxpayers millions of dollars, and now they're going to go back on it, or at least they're trying to. Earlier this week, Turkey's defense industries president Ismail Demir, one of the officials sanctioned over the S-400 deal, says country had all but given up on the issue, calling the F-35 discussions closed, and added that Ankara had no plans to obtain Patriot missile batteries anytime soon. He made no mention of Sherman's proposal, however. While Washington may enjoy seeing Russian missiles shoot down Russian aircraft over Ukraine, severing ties between Ankara and Moscow could have steep consequences, risking an end to Turkey-sponsored peace talks and an escalation of the war itself. So, this is pretty serious to be doing. The U.S., our role in this conflict right now should really just be aimed at creating some kind of end to it, and whatever concessions the U.S. could be making, about its missile defense system, the Aegis and the Patriots, maybe removing those from Eastern Europe, that would be fantastic, but we're going in the opposite direction. And further, we're deliberately floating plans that we know would upset Moscow with the country that's hosting the peace talks. Is absolutely despicable. And as I talked about with Scott Horton on the show last week, the U.S. lack of interest seeming in facilitating these talks makes you wonder if plan B, which was insurgency and prolonged warfare in Ukraine, really was plan A for the U.S. war state. All right, now let's talk about the talks. And we'll start with Turkey here because Turkey is reporting that there has been some progress being made. Other than Israel, Turkey is the main country that's pushing these peace talks. So Turkey says progress was made in Ukraine talks as Zelensky warns of World War III if diplomacy fails. Moscow and Kiev are nearing an agreement on a number of key issues in talks to end the fighting in Ukraine, Turkey's top diplomat said. While the progress marks a positive sign for diplomacy, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that a failure to strike a deal could kick off a third world war. In an interview with a Turkish outlet, the foreign minister said there is convergence between the two sides and that they have almost reached agreement on 4 crucial concessions from Ukraine in exchange for a ceasefire. Those points include Kiev's agreement to neutrality and non-NATO membership, the demilitarization, and as Russia puts it, denazification of Ukraine, as well as the removal of restrictions on the Ukrainian language. The diplomat did not spell out exactly what each concession would entail. Though any agreement will likely require approval from the leaders of both countries, the last point should be easily accepted by Zelensky, a native Russian speaker, whose Russian language film Love in the Big City 2 was banned by Ukraine in 2018 under a law citing quotas for Ukrainian language content. In exchange, Russia would declare a ceasefire and withdraw its troops from Ukrainian territory. However, the foreign minister failed to mention several major demands previously made by the Russian side, leaving the status of talks and their true likelihood for a final deal unclear. Moscow has insisted on independence for Donetsk and Luhansk provinces of the Donbass region and for Ukraine to accept its territorial claim to the Crimean Peninsula, which has been under Russian control since 2014. Further, fighting in Mariupol remains intense, suggesting will seek to wrest the largest port city from Ukrainian control, even as progress is reported in the negotiations. Attempt to create humanitarian corridors to let civilians leave the city has seen some success, though Kiev accuses Moscow of continued and indiscriminate shelling. On Sunday, the Russian military said it would allow non-combatants to flee along certain roads for a brief window of time, and that fighters could leave them so long as they abandoned their weapons. Ukrainian armed units and foreign mercenaries will be able to leave the city without weapons and munitions along a route agreed with Ukraine, said Colonel General of the Russian National Defense Management Center. All who lay down their arms are guaranteed safe passage out of Mariupol. That offer was rejected by Kiev, however, with Deputy Prime Minister telling a local newspaper there can be no talk of any surrender, laying down arms. We have already informed the Russian side about this, I wrote. Instead of wasting time on 8 pages of letters, just open the corridor. As diplomats seek to hammer out a ceasefire and de-escalate hostilities in Ukraine, Zelensky appeared with CNN's Fareed Zakaria on Sunday and said he would be open for direct talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but was warned that a failure to reach an agreement could have dire consequences. I'm ready for negotiations with him. I was ready for the last 2 years, and I think without negotiations, we cannot end this war. We have to use any format, any chance in order to have a possibility of negotiating, the possibility of talking to Putin. But if these attempts fail, that would mean this is a third world war. All right, so yeah, there you have it. Some positive signs from Turkey, right? Saying that they're coming to agreement on several issues. I guess Russia must be demanding something reasonable on the denazification if the Ukrainian government is agreeing to it. I guess if it's just, a large anti-Ukrainian policy, Zelensky would be far more resistant to agreeing to that. So that could be important. And then the big issue I think is the issues not discussed, which is the territorial claims, which I do think have to be resolved to probably get Russia to exit Ukraine at this point. Let's see. Now, and I guess another problem with all this is the West has gone so far with their economic war against Russia. If Ukraine were to sign an agreement that makes these concessions that Russia is demanding, the West isn't going to end their economic war against Russia because it would be seen as, giving him a victory. And this is a great point made by a recent article by David Hendrickson. I believe at the National Interest, he wrote this one. And so, yeah, I'm not sure how that's going to play in if, like, the Biden administration is, telling the Zelensky, like, hey, like, you could leverage the U.S. sanctions and say that if you agree to exit Ukraine, the U.S. will remove sanctions that were placed in the last few months on Russia or something like that. But we don't have any indication in that so far, or that the U.S. is in any way trying to facilitate any kind of talks here. It seems the most interested parties in that are Turkey and Israel. So one more story here on the talks, and this was an interesting statement that we got last week, and it was reporting, I believe, mainly from the Financial Times. Ukraine makes bid for mutual defense pact with U.S., and this is from myself and Will Porter, March 18th at the Libertarian Institute. Tentative progress has reportedly been made to end fighting in Russia and Ukraine after previous rounds of talks produced few results. However, one proposal pushed by Ukraine has blindsided Western officials and could drag America into a future war with Russia. The Ukrainian offer would involve a pledge to never join NATO, the NATO alliance, or host a foreign military base on its soil, but only in exchange for security guarantees from a number of countries. The Financial Times reported on Thursday, citing citing a senior advisor to President Volodymyr Zelensky and a number of diplomats. The source told FT that the proposal caught some officials off guard, as it would create a mechanism similar to NATO's Article 5 provision, requiring the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, along with Germany and Turkey, to secure Ukraine's sovereignty, in this case with the exemption of Russia itself. The wide-ranging defense guarantee would be a steep commitment. It's unclear if the U.S. Senate would ratify it, and it remains to be seen whether Russia would ultimately accept such an agreement. Moscow has suggested that Kiev enshrine neutrality into its constitution, akin to Austria, but Ukrainian officials have reportedly ruled out that idea, with one analyst saying it would go down like a cup of cold vomit. For the country's security establishment, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has nonetheless stated that progress is being made on the issue, as well as on potential security guarantees for Ukraine. Now, one I think very interesting point that we have here is if Russia is willing to agree to this proposal, that not that maybe the U.S. would agree to it, but if Russia were agreeable to it, it would suggest that the Russian concern here really wasn't that, Ukraine become an Article 5 or have a mutual defense guarantee with the United States, but was the deployment of foreign weapons, troops, and, training the Ukrainian forces for a war against Russia. And I don't know. It's interesting if that really is something that Russia is willing to agree to, but we'll have to see what comes out of this still. Now, I wrote this one up for antiwar.com yesterday, and of course, there's been a lot of attention in the mainstream media paid to the crackdown in Russia on Russian citizens, particularly those who oppose the war, and that is very important. That isn't a non-issue at all, and what the Russian people have been willing to stand up for against the government opposing the warfare is really huge, and those people should be congratulated and receive praise. Now, it's so ridiculous from the U.S. corporate media that basically if you're a U.S. dissenter to a war and you did that, you would be called a foreign agent. You would react exactly the way that the Russian media and the Russian state has reacted to their dissenters to war, and is just incredible that the U.S. corporate media is now praising these Russian dissenters without realizing the way they treat American dissenters. And Yeah, and so I'm really not going to spend a lot of time on this show covering the Russian crackdown, in part because I don't live in Russia, and while it's bad that Russians don't have more civil liberties, I'm always more concerned about my civil liberties than other people's, and it's on the Russian people to figure out what they want to do with their own government, and then when we're talking about the Zelensky government, however, this is a government backed by the U.S., being armed by the U.S., and so I do feel a little bit more responsible for his, dictates and everything than Vladimir Putin's, as the U.S. has no real control or influence over the Russian government, but has a lot over the Ukrainian government. In fact, it's in a lot of ways almost like a satellite state. So this from antiwar.com, Zelensky bans political opposition, nationalizes media to create unified information. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky banned 11 opposition political parties and nationalized media. Activities supporting the parties labeled pro-Russian are now illegal. That means if you're out there, saying not like saying I love Russia, but now if you're out there and you're supporting or opposing the Ukrainian government, I guess, even removing these, 44 people who are currently sitting in parliament are a member of one of these parties. So if you're in opposition to that, then you're, now carrying out legal activities in Ukraine. I mean, this is a pretty severe crackdown. Axios published a list of the parties, with the major one being the Platform for Life. Platform for Life is Ukraine's largest political opposition and currently holds 44 seats in parliament. Last year, the party's leader was accused of treason and placed under house arrest. Now, my understanding is since Russia invaded, his whereabouts are unclear, with some people reporting he was able to escape house arrest. I suppose another tragedy is also possible, which is he was just eliminated in the chaos by the Ukrainian government. Another targeted party, Nashi, is led by Yafin Muravev, and you may have heard that name before, but pronounced correctly, because the UK accused him of working with Moscow to overthrow the Ukrainian government on behalf of Russia. However, he is sanctioned by Russia and has been since 2018, and so, that was an obvious fate story that was planted in the media by the UK, but that intelligence was funneled through the US and actually given to the UK to give this the accusations of a potential Russian coup or false flag more air legitimacy. Back to the article, Ukraine's Russian minority has faced increased discrimination since the 2014 coup. The opposition parties largely represent the 70% of the Ukrainian people who are ethnic Russians. The new presidential order is a part of Zelensky's effort to create a unified political narrative in Ukraine. He has announced an information policy that combines all national TV channels into a single information platform for strategic communications. And again, as I've been talking about since the beginning of this war, there's concerning rhetoric from both sides. And even, if you could say, yeah, it was Vladimir Putin's invasion that provoked this concerning rhetoric from the Ukrainian government, that is kind of true, but they are, and then, in the past have taken anti-Russian stances and, banned pro-Russian media outlets and things like that. But this is definitely escalating. And at the point where the Ukrainian government is now banning all opposition parties and taking out the media, this could turn into a very, very ugly state very quickly, and one armed by the United States. All right, last, I think, story on Ukraine here, and this is about a potential red line being drawn on chemical weapons. Of course, I talked about this a little bit on the last show with Dave DeCamp about the chemical weapons, so I don't want to review really what the chemical weapons situation is, and potential chemical weapons situation is in Ukraine. If you are interested in that, go check out the last show. Dave DeCamp lays it all out. Just want to talk about U.S. politics on this one. Rep Liz Cheney suggests chemical weapons red line in Ukraine as she calls for calls for U.S. intervention grow louder. Congresswoman Liz Cheney said the U.S. should take action in Ukraine in the event that Russia uses chemical weapons, echoing a recent threat by Washington's UN envoy, who warned America will respond aggressively if such weapons are deployed. As to whether a red line should be established in Ukraine during an interview with NBC's Chuck Todd on Sunday, Rep. Cheney said chemical weapons should alter our calculations and potentially prompt a U.S. and allied response. We in the West, the United States and NATO, need to stop telling the Russians what we won't do. We need to be very clear that we are considering all options. They, meaning Russia, need to understand if the brutality here increases, the United States will contemplate and consider every possible range of actions with our NATO allies. UN Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, meanwhile, similarly declared that the United States will respond to the use of chemical weapons, though stopped short of describing what that would entail. We've been clear, if they escalate to this level, we will respond aggressively, she told CNN's Jay Tapper on Sunday. You've seen the consequences so far of our actions against Russia and against Putin, and they are feeling those consequences, and they will feel even more if they take this unfortunate decision to use chemical weapons. NATO head Jens Stoltenberg was also pressed the same question during a recent sit-down with Todd, with the anchor reportedly asking whether the military alliance would reconsider its refusal to implement a no-fly zone over Ukraine if Moscow deployed chemical weapons. Stoltenberg said that would be a blatant and brutal violation of international law, but cautioned against escalating the conflict into a regional or world war. President Barack Obama infamously drew a chemical weapons red line during the early years of the war in Syria and was pressured to get directly involved in the conflict. Despite backing rebel groups with hundreds of millions of dollars in arms, as well as allegations of Syrian government chemical weapons attacks, Obama resisted pressure to bomb or send troops, instead endorsing an agreement to destroy Syria's chemical weapons stockpile with Vladimir Putin in 2013. The Donald Trump administration faced similar pressure following alleged chemical weapons attack in the Syrian city of Douma, while whistleblowers from the UN watchdog, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or OPCW, have disputed the ORD's conclusion that Damascus was behind the attack. Trump responded with missiles alongside France and the UK, some of the target sites cleared by the OPCW months before. So they hit sites they knew weren't chemical weapons. Joe Biden may soon find himself in the same position, while he is yet to paint himself into a corner with any firm red lines. Near constant predictions of a Russian chemical weapons attack and calls from Ukrainian officials for major military support could ultimately prod the administration to take more drastic action, risking precisely the full-scale conflict warned of by the NATO chief. So, I think that, we basically summarize everything I want to say in that article. I do want to add there is a great point made by Ray McGovern in his article today at antiwar.com, explaining that Chuck Todd was actually the one that asked Obama about the Syrian red line back, I think, in 2012. It was like a year or so, several months before the actual chemical weapons attack happened. And so, interesting that Chuck Todd is again involved with this, not necessarily suggesting any kind of conspiracy there, just, this is apparently something that guy is really obsessed with, drawing red lines, which of course are almost always used by the war state to try to pressure American politicians into taking more aggressive actions overseas. All right. Do I have anything else about Russia today? I don't think so. That should about cover it. There are warnings on all sides of a potential false flag in Ukraine. And so, the concern is, I think for me is, if chemical weapons in Ukraine are used, it's going to take a long time to get to the truth. It's not going to happen in days, weeks, months. It'll be years, right? Years before we know what happened. But nobody will be satisfied with that. And as soon as chemical weapons are used, it will be blamed on Russia, either as a false flag, they dressed up as Ukrainians and pretended to do it, or as a direct, Russia did it because Putin was frustrated and is going crazy and is increasingly isolated. And look how far he sits from everybody. And oh my God, the guy is the new Hitler. So yeah, he used chemical weapons. And if you dispute it, you're a Putin puppet. And that's that. Do you want to be a traitor like Tulsi Gabbard and Tucker Carlson, or do you want to be a good American and believe that Putin did this? This is exactly what happened in 2017 and then in 2018 with Assad. And in both of those cases, Trump went ahead, decided, and carried out a missile attack against the Assad government. So this is very dangerous, what we're talking about here. And I really wish it wasn't being discussed. Now let's take a minute and talk about the Assange appeal and then Somalia. So first up here with the Assange Appeal, this from myself and Will Porter last week at the Libertarian Institute. UK Supreme Court rejects Assange extradition appeal. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has lost an appeal to block his extradition to the United States, with the UK Supreme Court outright refusing to hear the petition. The decision strikes a major blow in efforts to free the journalist and anti-secrecy advocates, though some options remain open to him. Monday's decision follows a previous high court ruling which found that Assange could be extradited despite ongoing mental health issues and even the risk of suicide should he be locked up in an American prison. Assange's legal team challenged the decision, but the Supreme Court found the appeal does not raise an arguable point of law and declined to hear the case. Barry Pollock, one of Assange's U.S.-based lawyers, called the ruling extremely disappointing, but said the journalist's legal team will continue fighting his extradition to the United States to face criminal charges for publishing truthful and newsworthy information. While the court shut down a major argument cited by Assange's defense throughout the case, the possibility that he would take his own life in custody has not exhausted all of his options for appeal. As noted by the British journalist Mohammed Al-Mazi, once Assange's case is directed back towards the UK Home Secretary, the defense will have 4 weeks to submit arguments for her to reject extradition, as well as the chance to file appeals on the grounds they originally lost on. A district court had previously blocked the extradition on mental health grounds, but London's High Court overturned that ruling after an appearance by Joe Biden's Justice Department. The court accepted assurances from Attorney General Merrick Garland that Assange would not be held in the most restrictive American prisons or face the worst forms of solitary confinement. Assange's lawyers say those promises are merely conditional and aspirational, however, arguing that Washington is unlikely to keep its words. Though President Barack Obama was more squeamish about prosecuting the journalist, fearing the move would criminalize the reporting of mainstream corporate news agencies, the campaign against him was accelerated under Donald Trump, and especially after WikiLeaks published the Vault 7 documents. As detailed by Yahoo News on the CIA secret war plans against WikiLeaks, the Trump White House seriously considered kidnapping and even assassinating Assange. Some members of the administration discussed a potential gun battle with the Kremlin operatives on the streets of London, believing alarming reports that Moscow was prepared to sneak Assange out of the UK. No such plans ever materialized, but Trump's legal efforts to against Assange have continued into the Biden presidency, despite pressure from press, freemen, and human rights groups, as well as UN torture expert Niels Melzer, for the DOJ to drop all charges, including those under World War I era Espionage Act, and allow the journalists to go free. Assange's extradition and likely successful prosecution in the U.S. criminal justice system would deal a major blow to the First Amendment, handing the federal government precedent to imprison reporters and and publishers as enemies of the state and effectively criminalize investigative journalism. Absolutely, that is the problem that we are currently facing and why Assange needs to go free. As we point out, there are still potential options open. The most urgent seems to be the UK Foreign Secretary, or the UK secretary that's in charge of this, and putting pressure there. Although, as Kevin Gostola pointed out on a recent interview with of the Scott Horton show, that seems unlikely given her political positions. If you want a more thorough breakdown on this, Scott and Kevin do an excellent job. Again, that's a very recent episode. You can find it at the Libertarian Institute. Now, let's wrap up here by talking about Somalia. And the first one I want to mention is that the Pentagon released its reports on the Camp Simba attack. This was in Kenya in 2020, where a group of al-Shabaab militants attacked I believe it is a U.S. military base that was joint with, Kenya. And the militants were able to blow up a couple U.S. Aircraft, including one that had 2 contractors into it, killing both of them, and then also killed a U.S. soldier in the ensuing firefight. The Department of Defense has issued 2 reviews of the 2020 al-Shabaab attack on the Camp Simba military base in Kenya that killed 3 Americans. The report names poor leadership, inadequate training, and a culture of complacency as the leading causes that allowed the attack to succeed, according to sources that spoke with the AP before the report was released. Now, there's kind of 2 aspects to this report. The one is where, it blames the soldiers on the ground and their commanders for what happened, a lack of training, not understanding the risk with the missions that they were carrying out at the base. Apparently they had carried out more advanced missions at the base more recently, making them more of a target, and, that wasn't addressed in the threat assessment, the security, and everything like that. What nobody assesses is AFRICOM, the fact that Trump wanted the troops out of Somalia long before this attack ever happened, and how the lives could have been saved that way, and that was the Pentagon pressure that kept the troops there for no real reason. So anyways, this attack, this attack was in Kenya, not Somalia. So even if Trump did withdraw the troops from Somalia, which he wanted to do, maybe I think there's a good chance if the U.S. ended the war in Somalia as Trump wanted to in 2017, this attack probably wouldn't have happened. Although it's not exactly clear that these troops wouldn't have been at Camp Simba because they may have been carrying out operations. But if you do look at the reports, they, do highlight that it was that this base was carrying out operations in Somalia that made it the target of al-Shabaab. So 8 airmen, I think, in total ended up receiving reprimands from pretty low to pretty high grades. It doesn't sound like anybody got in real trouble, though. More just letters and files kind of thing. At the press conference on this, the Pentagon deflected questions about that particular point. And then the last point I want to make on this, though, and I think almost which was more significant, the Pentagon attributed this to, a revigorated al-Shabaab insurgency, looking not at all one instance at what the U.S. had been doing during the Trump administration, its massive bombing campaign in Somalia that flew literally under everybody's radar. Nobody paid attention to what Trump was doing in Somalia, and he killed an awful lot of civilians. And so there's, no reflection on how it's actually the U.S. war in Somalia that is causing the resurgence of al-Shabaab and leading al-Shabaab to carry out attacks on American and international targets. The U.S. is just, making this out to be, this insurgency group exists and was highly motivated and carried out an attack. But I think it supports the current narrative being pushed by the Pentagon, which was we need to send troops back into Somalia because al-Shabaab is growing and we got to do something about it. So I feel like, the important part here is that the narrative that the Pentagon is now trying to present that was Trump's withdrawal from Somalia that has reinvigorated al-Shabaab is completely untrue, because that they're already saying that in 2020 in this Camp Simba attack that this is already an issue. And so it can't then be that Trump's troop withdrawal right at the end of his administration, troops don't I think end up leaving until January, could possibly been the cause for this. Further, as the Pentagon points out, the troops have just been commuting to work. This is what AFRICOM has said the whole time. They base the troops in the region and they fly them into the bases in Somalia to do the same thing. Now, I do agree with the Pentagon that that's probably less efficient, but I don't even know if it's safe or anything like that. At the same time, it's nice that the U.S. doesn't have troops on the ground in Somalia. So, getting to the current situation in Somalia and the Pentagon's desire to send troops back, I have a new article from last week that I wrote with Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute. Over 1 million Somali children near starvation as Pentagon plans new troop deployment. The Pentagon wants to send troops back to Somalia on a permanent basis just 14 months after they were ordered to leave. The push for a new deployment as AFRICOM faces as the African nation faces a serious drought, with the UN warning that 1.4 million children are at risk of acute malnutrition in the coming months. Speaking to the Senate on Thursday, U.S. AFRICOM Command Head General Stephen Townsend warned that Somali jihadist faction al-Shabaab is seeking a resurgence after American troops pulled back a little over a year ago, calling it among the fastest growing wealthiest and deadliest terrorist groups in the world. Our willingness to work with African partners creates a huge demand for our engagement and partnership in Africa, Townsend said. That periodic engagement has created new challenges and risks to our troops. The general went on to argue that U.S. forces are not putting sufficient pressure on militant groups like al-Shabaab, and that he has submitted advice for new deployments. Obviously, this is untrue. The U.S. has been trying to put sufficient pressure on terrorist groups from, all the way Libya to Afghanistan, Pakistan for the past 20 something years now. And basically the result has just been to create more jihadists. After losing the 2020 election, outgoing President Donald Trump gave the order to remove 700 special forces troops and that were stationed in Somalia. Most of them, the soldiers, were simply redeployed to other countries in the region, continuing the same mission. It is unclear how a larger military footprint will solve the problems outlined by AFRICOM. Far from creating a crack in anti-terrorism force, the U.S. mission in Somalia has often fueled local power struggles that amount to warlords, with one CIA trained commando unit halting its fight against jihadist groups altogether last year in order to clash with other Somali troops. So, the groups that the U.S. says, if we go train them, they're going to fight al-Shabaab, are currently fighting each other. So that's just simply not true. This plan has no chance for success as it is. The growing extremist movement in the Horn of Africa has been helped in no small part by foreign meddling and attempts to dictate political outcomes from faraway capitals. Before breaking away and declaring allegiance to Al-Qaeda, al-Shabaab was once the youth wing of the comparatively moderate Islamic Courts Union, which took power in Mogadishu in 2016 in 2006 after driving out local warlords. Refusing to accept a Somalia ruled under Islamic law, however, the George W. Bush administration backed an Ethiopian invasion to oust the ICU, but ultimately agreed to let the group remain in power in the forms of a U.S.-created transitional federal government. After a brutal bout of fighting, the ICU's youth faction refused to accept the American dictate and continued fighting, becoming increasingly radical before ultimately transforming into the jihadist outfit that exists today. And just on that, some recent attacks in Somalia by al-Shabaab. There was 8 killed by a suicide bomber targeting a UN convoy. The prime minister's spokesperson was injured by al-Shabaab. Worth noting that was the prime minister, because there is a split in the Somali government leadership between the prime minister and The president, we also had the prime minister announcing before this attack that the UAE would get back the $10 million that had been seized by the Somali government 4 or 5 years ago. It was a long time ago they took this money. And so I wonder if that has anything to do with the suicide attack and the split, the fact that the prime minister is maybe more favorable to the UAE. But getting back to the Al-Shabaab attacks, there were 4 killed in a suicide bombing, 7 killed in a bus bombing in Kenya, 10 killed in fighting between Al-Shabaab and the Somali government, 6 killed in a suicide bombing, 5 killed in 2 different Al-Shabaab bombings, and then the U.S. killed between 60 and 200 people it claimed were all Al-Shabaab militants in an airstrike, although I'm not willing to accept that the U.S. actually did kill all militants there. So, this is a radical group that does kill a lot of civilians in its attacks. Very, very disturbing stuff going on. But back to the article. As in the early 2000s and 2010s, economic instability, lack of opportunity, and famine conditions continue to inflame the situation in Somalia, with the UN's World Food Program now reporting the worst drought in the region in 4 decades. Should the dry conditions persist, up to 1.4 million children under the age of 5 could face acute malnutrition by the end of 2022. In the wake of Ethiopia's incursion, a previous famine killed nearly 260,000 Somalis between 2010 and 2012, around half of them children. Ongoing fighting with local militants only worsened the humanitarian catastrophe, making it much harder for Somali farmers to get their crops to market. Despite years of U.S. involvement, Somalia faces worse conditions now than it did prior to the 2011 drought, with 2.9 million Somalis currently internally displaced, nearly double the number reported in 2011, and armed extremist element even larger than before. Now considering yet another troop deployment when Somalis are in need of desperate humanitarian aid, Biden is the 6th consecutive U.S. president to attempt to fit the country with military might, beginning with the 28,000 soldier military mission under George H.W. Bush in 1992. While the current administration has carried out far fewer strikes than Trump did, a recent drone attack on an Al-Shabaab base was alleged to have killed 200 militants, per the claims of local officials. So, yeah, this is, I think, a really bad situation that Somalia faces, and is only going to get worse with the current U.S. policy. If we do send troops on the ground, if we do motivate more fighting in Somalia, yeah, we might kill some jihadists, but we also may, that increased fighting is going to make it harder for people to get from point A to point B, people to, bring their food to market, people to get to the market to buy the food. And as these things get more difficult, it's the children, particularly the children under 5, that suffer and die from it. And so I think we're looking at another period of that in Somalia. Also, if you look at the situation in Ukraine, which is a major producer of wheat, there's some concern among human rights groups around the world that the lack, or the constraining the wheat market, is going to hurt the people on the margins by slightly raising the prices. Yemen, I think, raised like a third of the funds the UN raised like a third of the funds that they were trying to for aid to Yemen, and have already started cutting back on aid. So if it gets more expensive, how much more are they going to have to cut back on? And then this is a growing problem too in Ethiopia, in Somalia, in Myanmar, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Iraq, all these places where the U.S. is heavily involved militarily, carrying out massive sanctions campaigns, economic campaigns. It's absolutely devastating. And so, maybe it will be Putin's war in Ukraine that pushes some things over the edge here. But generally speaking, it's all these U.S. actions around the world that are creating all these absolutely terrible, terrible situations where people are on the brink of death, and could be brought there with any little push. And the more people you have in this situation, the more it's going to strain the international aid situation too. And so many of these problems caused by the U.S. imperialism. and must be imposed. And so, with that, I'll wrap up the show and just remind people to go support the Libertarian Institute 2022 spring fundraiser. It would really help out with everything that we're trying to do there. Great things are going to be happening at the site. And of course, if you listen to this, I know that you really do like the work that me and Will Porter are doing, all the writing that we've been doing. And one of the great ways to support that and, show Scott and everybody at the Institute that what we're doing is real valuable, is going and giving some support. So libertarianinstitute.org/donate, and I will be back with more shows later in the week.